Hello, everybody. It's Dr. Nick. No, I'm Jez Corden from Windows Central and the Xbox 2 podcast. And you are listening to XB2+1 on patreon.com/XB2 or a little later on my own YouTube channel. So thanks so much to everyone for joining us on this lovely April Fool's Day, April Fool's Day 2025. I promise there's not going to be any April shenanigans on this show. I haven't prepared anything, and I'm not witty enough to do something off the cuff. So don't expect anything crazy on this show. But I'm pretty excited about today's guest because obviously gaming handhelds have been in the news a lot lately, and obviously with Xbox's interest in that segment, I really wanted to speak to this particular guest, but first I want to explain why Rand isn't here. Rand isn't here because he couldn't make it for reasons that I'm sure he'll go into on Friday. But uh, it's just me and Carrie at the moment. Is that how you pronounce your name? Have I pronounced that wrong?
No, no, that is correct.
Brilliant, excellent. Well, without further ado, welcome Carrie, otherwise known as Phawx, or the Phawx on YouTube,
Yep.
illustrious PC gaming handheld content creator. Hi,
Thank
dude.
you.
How
Thank
you
you. Thanks so
doing?
much. Pretty good. Not too bad. Just got off work. Pretty excited to be chatting with you. I've been wanting to chat with you for quite a while. I'm interested to pick your brain. I'm delighted to be talking about handhelds. Switch 2 is in the news. I would love to talk about that. I'd love to talk about Xbox handhelds, Xbox's strategy, PC gaming handhelds. It's all stuff that I love to talk about.
Yeah, man. When I was a kid, I had this like Casio, this like weird Casio personal assistant device thing. It was like in the early 90s. It was just like it was like a calculator, but you could type strings into it, and it could organize your stuff, and there was like little games on it, and eventually it like broke after a few months, but it was just like, this is fantastic. And I always had that dream of having like, it'd be so cool to have like, my Sega Genesis in the palm of my hand. And I know the Sega Game Gear was a thing back then, but it was monstrously expensive in the UK, so I never had one. But fast forward to 2025, and there's all this tech that's sort of enabling this experience like never before. And obviously smartphones are a thing, but on the gaming side, we're getting to that point now of actually having an Xbox 360 or maybe even Xbox One, PS4 in something you could carry with you in your pocket, which is to me just a dream come true, in a lot of ways. Some people are not that into it. Rand's not that into it, my podcast buddy, but I assuredly am into it, and I've learned a lot from watching your channel. So thanks for putting all that content together, because I find it is quite a complicated segment. How did you come to decide? You know what? I'm going to be the preeminent gaming handheld content creator on YouTube. How did you come to that decision?
That goes back pretty far. Initially, when I first started my YouTube channel a long, long time ago, it was initially just to have like achievements and stuff. Like anytime I did anything that was worthwhile and that I captured, I would put it on there. So there was like an Xbox Live indie game called The Impossible Game, and I beat that game in like after like 137 tries. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's pretty good. Let me put that up. That's what it was like. YouTube was exclusive for initially, and then around 2011 or so, I started actually leaning away from consoles and started moving heavier into PCs. But I started wanting to go into more indie games, so my channel became very indie game focused. But at the time in 2008, not many people know about this, but it was actually in UK and Germany. There was a handheld called the Open Pandora, and it was the first handheld. It was when ARM was making their new CPU processor, the one that kind of like sparked everything. This is the Cortex A8. In the Open Pandora started in 2008. It actually delivered in 2011. So for like 3 years after I'd paid, I was still waiting for it. But even up until that point, it was still very powerful. So I always had a large fascination for handhelds and what they could do and what they were capable of, and especially with just being fascinated by low power devices and trying to get the most out of them. In 2015, so this whole scene, this whole like I'd say it's like an indie handheld scene, kind of. There was lots of other smaller, very niche, super niche handhelds. So there was like the Dingu, and the Wiz, the GP32X. So there was all of these different, the GP32. So there's all of these different kind of like weird offshoot, like the Gizmondo, right? Like these are things that you kind of like remembered, but it was kind of like this weird thing that would just show up. They were pretty cool, and on this forum that came out of the Dingu scene was Dingunity. This website is no longer around, unfortunately. But in 2015, GPD, the Gamepad Digital, they were making Android handhelds at the time, like 2013, 2014, and those were fascinating as well. But 2015 rolls around, and they're like, "We're gonna make a Windows PC gaming handheld," and I was like, "Yes, I am all about this." And at the time, this is when Intel is banging on all cylinders. They were, they flew past everyone. Everyone was still pretty much, even still at this point, still stuck on 28 nanometer planner. They went ahead to 22 nanometer FinFET, 14 nanometer FinFET, and they were trying to get into the mobile game because mobile was exploding with Android and iPhone. So they had kind of accelerated their Intel Atom line, and they had a very low power part. So GPD was able to get this for very cheap, and I was fascinated by this. And it was fascinating at the time because there was like a war that happened on this forum, and everyone was like, should it have a keyboard? Should it just be like, a traditional game thing? And I was like, look, you cannot control Windows with just a controller and a touchscreen.
Yeah.
It's going to be atrocious. We need a mouse and a keyboard that is always on this thing. So it became they ultimately went into having the clamshell style design where you would have the keyboard, and then they would emulate a mouse with the analog stick. So they actually created their own IC for that, and it would switch between emulated mouse and X input and D input. When the GP2 came out, they abandoned D input and only did X input. So that came around, and then when I got that, I went full hardcore on my channel. So in 2016, when it like officially launched, I just was like, okay, I'm going to show everyone, what you can actually do in the PC space. And I was also really loving indie games, and indie games can run on toasters. So I was like, okay, I can do these just fine. But, on an Intel Atom chipset, I was showing that Doom 2016 could run. So in the year 2016, I was running Doom on an Intel Atom little thing that's, taking 5 watts. And I had to really just get into the ini file of Doom 2016. I basically made a 3DS version of Doom 2016,
Hmm.
but it ran at like around 30-ish FPS. And truthfully, when I did that, I showed like, you have to go to these lengths to get to be able to play it. But when I showed that off, people had not even considered it as even a remote possibility, let alone running as well as it was. And then I would show Skyrim and other stuff, and then as people started seeing it, they started to realize the potential. And during that time, I became friendly with GPD, and I was telling them, I was like, "Look, we got to go to Intel's Core M platform instead of Atom." And they were like, "Well, that's going to double the cost." And everyone on the Dinguni forum was like, "Yes, we want to pay more." So they're like, "Okay." And then the GPD Win 2 came out, which was 10 times better than the GPD Win 1. And it was just a refinement. It was amazing to see what they were capable of doing, even at a prototype stage. And I want to say that that helped spark everything. And the problem was is that we also find ourselves in that same lull right now. So from like 2017 to 2021, there really wasn't any good enough handheld. The GPD Win 2, which really was not good enough to run most things, was the only thing that was available. And we had like the Aya Neo initially, which was the 4500U, and then we had Tiger Lake, but that was still not good enough. And then enter the Steam Deck in 2021, and you know that was
And it changed everything,
it.
didn't it?
It did because obviously Valve is a huge company, so there's people that are paying attention and didn't know anything that I've been doing, right? So I was doing it for like 6 years at that point. So I was just like, there's dozens of us just screaming in the corner, like, uh, but we were that scene alone. We went so far into really digging down deep. Like you go back to like 2019, 2020, we were doing 40 hertz, setting a refresh rate to 40 hertz on these panels, so that we can run at 40 FPS and have it look clean. So we were doing that before then, and I was actually talking with Valve at the time when I was in the preview thing. I was like, "Did you guys ever consider this?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, yeah, we did." In fact, we went through like 12 different panels. Like Valve went through 12 different displays before they settled on the one that they did because of its capability of statically setting the refresh rate on there. So I was like, "Oh, that's awesome." So I was waiting for them to do it, and it was taking them time. So then I was like, "Well, I'll just do it myself on Windows." So I did it, and then like that day, they're like, "Oh yeah, so we have it on SteamOS as well." I was like, "Oh, all right." Yeah, so I showed that off, and it's all of these things that it's almost counterintuitive, right? I've digressed pretty far, but this is like how I've got to where I am and where my channel, like, that's why I called my channel the Phawx. Initially, it was supposed to be Phawx, but someone on YouTube took Phawx, and he still hasn't even done anything with that channel as far as I know. So I just made a YouTube channel, the Phawx, which was just really supposed to be for like 360 achievements and stuff, or just gaming achievements in general, right? Anything that I recorded. And that's the progress of where I came and how I got to where I was in this space. And that more or less why I probably have a clearer sense of where we came from and where things are and how they perform.
Man, that's like I didn't realize honestly that it went back that far because, obviously I think for a lot of people in the mainstream, it was sort of like the Nintendo Switch and then Steam
Yeah,
Deck, and there wasn't like anything before that. I mean, outside of the obvious things like the Game Boy and things like that, right? I mean, for me, like GPD Win was my first experience with a handheld from that sort of alternative realm, like the outside of the Nintendo PSP, the sort of more mainstream stuff. And I did a review of the GPD Win for Windows Central, and you guys can check it out. Just hammer it into Google if you want to check out what this device was. But it was so interesting and unique because it was basically a mini laptop with a couple of thumbsticks grafted to the keyboard, and you sort of
mhm,
like you had to hold a toggle to turn one of the joysticks into a mouse, if I remember correctly. And
that's correct.
yeah, and I was quite stunned by how performant it was, despite how big it was. Like this is something that you literally could fit in your pocket. And
Right.
I remember I reviewed XCOM 2 on there, I think.
Mm.
So I was playing quite, for the time, intensive sort of games. I can't remember what year it was now. When did that come out? It was quite a while ago now. Um,
So the GPD-1 came out in 2016 of
God damn.
September, and then I had the Win 2 late 2017. I had a
Right.
prototype of it, and then in 2018 it came out for pretty much everyone else. Um, so yeah, that's basically what it was. And like the GP Win 1 compared to the GP Win 2, the whole like it is a completely different world now because Shenzhen is this powerful force to be reckoned with insofar as their manufacturing might and
Mhm.
and how fast they can prototype things, and the degree of the quality of these prototypes is astonishing. So when you take a look at the GP2-in-1 versus the GP2-in-2, the GP2-in-1 is like the very old made in China type of feel,
Yeah.
and the GP2-in-2 was like, oh, this is actually good. And it was only for me to get it. It was basically a year difference, right? So to see that level of quality change from 1 year was like, whoa, what in the world happened here? Because this is like drastic. And yeah, it's they've come pretty far in terms of even just machining different types of metals rapidly and at pretty good scale, considering that they have such low order counts, right? Like they're only doing like, 10,000, 20,000 of these. So these numbers would be gigantic failures for Asus, Sony, Microsoft, but for these small, kind of cottage industry that has blossomed in Shenzhen, they only have like 30 employees or so, 20, 30 employees, and they succeed. So
It's
it's a
almost
really interesting.
boutique, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it's only really possible. The mobile industry essentially paved the way for this to happen, specifically because, and you can look at this, and something that I've always kind of like tried to hammer home to people because they don't realize it. The mobile industry created portrait-based displays, and because they were so prevalent and so many, that the GP2+1, the GP2+2, every other handheld that came out, they were just buying stock, or just surplus stock of these displays. They didn't go to a display manufacturer to get it done. They just literally got displays that were already created and then just slapped them onto one of these things. And then, if there was a MIPI based display, which they typically are, um, some different platforms don't support MIPI directly. This is the type of standard. Imagine if it's HDMI or DisplayPort, right? So I'm just saying this was using like a VGA cable.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I noticed that
so
the Legion Go also has a portrait
portrait based
display by
display.
default, right?
Exactly correct. Yeah. So that is also, I believe, a MIPI based display. So it's actually a mobile display first. It's a tablet type of display.
Mm.
And so this is it's cheaper to do those, right? Because you're not manufacturing anything. And Asus really deserved credit because when they came out with the RG Ally, they had an EDP 120 hertz VRR display. So VRR is not capable on MIPI based displays. So this is like when the first news of the Asus RG Ally first came out, literally like 2 years ago, right? Like on April Fool's 2 years ago. The initial video I made, I was like, "Oh my goodness, you guys have a 120 hertz display. This is like, I mean, did you think about what you're doing? Because it's hard for us to run games at 120 FPS, even if it's possible. Like we struggle to hit 60 and 70 FPS, and you have a display that goes to 120. And then it found out like a week or two later, or 3 weeks later, that it was actually a VRR display, and I was like, oh, this is different. This
Yeah.
changes everything completely. So they really deserve credit for actually making a display and how little power it takes. It's a very handheld focused type of display. But yeah, the mobile industry itself is literally the reason why PC gaming handhelds, in my opinion, happened and got to the point where they are because they allowed companies to not spend as much capital to produce a device and test the
Because
waters.
there was like there was just more of these components and supply chains out there
Correct.
in order
Yeah,
to bring this market to bear, right? So
exactly right.
I
So
never really thought of it
yeah,
that way.
yeah, so you that's why, like again in Shenzhen, where they just like have buildings where you can just go and just find parts for just displays, and they have, an assortment of anything. So all these companies like GPD, INEO, they basically just go and say, okay, how many you have? You have 20,000, you have 30,000 of these displays. Great, that's probably more than I'll sell in total of these units. So they'll like, or maybe they'll just have like 1,000 or 2,000, and they'll just kind of part it out that way. But because these are so, in the grand scheme of things, in terms of like manufacturing, these are very, very low order numbers.
Yeah.
Having, if you could imagine like an Xbox, and like, oh, we're gonna make 1,000 of them, and like that's it. Like you're gonna need a few more. Um,
Yeah,
when you create,
sorry, go on.
go ahead.
Oh, well,
So when you create this, well, very quickly, when you create displays, you have to create a big order for them. So if you want a very specific display, it's going to be hundreds of thousands of those.
Yeah.
So that is a large capital cost that you have to get to. So the mobile industry basically, flattened this entire thing, and it's my opinion why we are in the situation as fast as we are.
Well, that sort of leads me on to my next question, I suppose, and there's few people I can imagine who are better placed to answer a question like this, because one thing Rand, my podcast buddy, always says is like, what's the scale of the opportunity here? Because you talk about things like, minimum orders of screens and having access to parts is easy over in that side of the world, potentially. But like for a Microsoft, for example, who think on a much bigger, grander sort of scale, um, one of the things Rand always said, the mentality Rand and others, frankly, have is why would Microsoft bother getting into this space when the Steam Deck itself doesn't seem to have sold the kind of numbers that would um, sort of inspire and at least in a lot of people's minds, the impetus to even try, when we're talking about the units sold by the Nintendo Switch or like a more
Right.
traditional console like a PlayStation or an Xbox, um, the Switch Steam Deck numbers, sorry, aren't quite there yet. So I suppose what I'm asking is like, how how scalable do you think this new segment is, and what's the scale of the opportunity here? Do you think
So
is
it,
there more hype than substance potentially?
all right. So I can only speak anecdotally and like from my own frame of reference and for what I could see as far as the people I can interact with. And usually it's like,
Yeah,
people that are in this space or whatnot. But you take a look at the Nintendo Switch and they're at 150 million units sold now, which is closing in on PS2 territory. Now the deal is that PS2 has 160 million units, which Sony bumped up recently once Nintendo started getting close. They're like, oh, actually we have 160. Um, but the PS2 was a fantastic console. Not only was it a fantastic console, it was legitimately a good, inexpensive DVD player. So the PlayStation 2 had that going for it, where it was not just a game console; it was also
true.
at the time, a really good DVD player.
Mm.
I My high school teacher who didn't play games literally told me like a classroom out loud that he got it just for DVDs. So I am confident that there are numbers of sold PlayStation 2 units that weren't used for gaming at all. On the flip side, for the Nintendo Switch where it has 150 million units sold, the difference between a console and a handheld is that a console, at least from a family's perspective, is a device for the family, and a handheld is a device for the individual. Like no one just buys an iPhone for the family; they buy iPhones.
Yes.
So any type of family that has multiple kids, there are going to be two switches that are sold, three switches sold, four switches sold. So that's one family having, one PlayStation or maybe two PlayStations and four switches. You know what I mean? Like handhelds themselves are individual purchases. They are for the individual. They're not for the group. And I think that insofar as if you were to just take a look at for people that are like sales dominant, they take a look at sales as the premium source of if a thing is a success or not. Having a handheld, I'm not saying that it would artificially increase the thing. I'm just saying that like there is going to be something baked into that number where one family could have more than one um, as just a regular thing. So an Xbox handheld. So why hasn't the Steam Deck sold more than 4 million units? The Steam Deck has only been sold on Steam, and in Japan they have like a one brick and mortar store, or not one, but they have a brick and mortar that I'm aware of that sells Steam Decks in Japan. And outside of Steam, no one really knows about that. And I said one time, I was like, they sold 4 million units with zero advertising. And people were like, what do you mean zero advertising? As soon as I go to steam.com, I get blasted in the face with a banner. And I'm like, that's if I were to go to the Coke factory and see a Coke banner, that's not advertisement. That's just a banner inside the factory. I mean, I guess you consider it advertisement, but you have to be already a customer of the thing for the advertisement to work, which is
Yeah.
not. I would submit is not the actual purpose of advertisements. So until they, for lack of a better word, until there is an easy enough awareness, the insofar as advertising and going to brick and mortar stores for whatever those are worth now, but like going into Walmart, Best Buy, stores that people frequent, and just having the thing in front of you to be able to be witnessed and seen, that in and of itself, it changes things. And the Steam Deck isn't there. So selling 4 million units when it's basically it's just hardcore people, right? And if you take a look at the concurrent user list of Steam, not the total amount of Steam users, so total Steam users like 130 million users, but the people that are logged in on an active connection at any given time just crossed 40 million units. So that means that 10% of the concurrent users have bought a Steam Deck. And I think that's good numbers, especially for where the Steam Deck is currently. Because while a lot of people think that the Steam Deck is, it is great, the reality is for most people's perspective, what they think of PC gaming is where the premium gaming stuff is. So if you go to a PC and are getting sub console like resolutions and 30 FPS, that's like, well, that's not PC. That's worse than my console.
Mm,
So the Steam Deck itself is, for all intents and purposes, a literal good first step for what a handheld should be.
mm,
So that's where we are. Once I think you start seeing like better performance, and once you can start wowing people, like their expectations are met in a handheld package, then all of the conveniences of it really start to shine. And we still have to get to that Switch like mentality, right? Like
yeah.
even for Switch, it really didn't change much of the gameplay. But if the video, I mean, it's over 2 years now. The one where I said like Xbox can make a handheld. If you could in your head like have a handheld that plays Series S games, and then when you dock it goes to Series X, that's compelling. I think that's a compelling thing to get. It's like, oh, it's good in handheld, but then it's awesome when it's docked.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot there that they could do that is opposite, not opposite, but not the same type of going gangbusters on console being the most powerful console. They could be the most powerful handheld, but you're still in that same type of zone of you're going to be playing the games that we've already been playing. Um, but you're asking someone that is like, I'm so heavily biased towards handheld that I think that I see all of the value of it
Yeah.
where it's very self-evident for me. I still think there are challenges, and it's mostly a messaging one because of most people's expectations of what a handheld can be.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting because, the I think what Steam what Steam and Valve really did for the handheld space is to sort of give us a vision of what a PC gaming handheld could look like if it was more uh more heavily designed for the form factor, because obviously one of the big criticisms of the Windows-based handhelds for all their compatibility um, under the hood is that on the face of it, like Windows is kind of clunky to navigate without a keyboard and mouse, as you mentioned before, and stuff like that. Um, it's kind of with that in mind that I come to Mecha Gojira's question here. And thanks to Mecha Gojira for the memberships, really appreciate it, mate. Um, so he asks, and we'll get to Project Kennen in a minute because I did see your tweets about it, and I'm interested to hear your elaborated take. But he says, assuming that Xbox does make a handheld, and we don't have official confirmation yet, but assuming that Xbox itself makes a handheld, and you talked about docking it and things like that, what kind of tech would it take inside the next Xbox handheld under the TV to really impress you and say it's everything you wanted from a handheld? It's kind of a broad question, but I'm sure you've thought about it.
Oh, yeah, so I mean the what I'm looking for, I think that Xbox has the chops. Microsoft has the bank to do it right. And I think that you take a look, the split memory design of the Xbox is contentious. There's a lot of people that don't like it, but bifurcating that in software is easy enough, and having the division of RAM that runs a bit slower on the hypervisor side, and just giving the fast RAM to the containerized part where the game runs is trivial. I'm not going to say it's not hard, but I'm just saying that you can bifurcate this and get the results of having just the uber fast RAM. And that type of min maxing that Microsoft has done in the Xbox Series S and X is actually really cool. And that's a way of having your cake and eating it too. So if Xbox has already been in that sphere of having your cake and eating it too, let's take that to the next level for handhelds.
Mm.
Let's go ahead and work with AMD, because right now AMD is not giving us handheld chips. They are giving us laptop chips, slapping a Z1E on it and saying, "Yeah, that's for the handheld," but it's just a laptop chip. we have 8 cores that go up to 5 gigahertz on CPU. That doesn't make games go, faster or look better, like with higher resolutions. We could eventually get to higher FPS if the GPU is there, and the GPU is there, but we don't have the bandwidth on memory to feed the GPU for the CPUs to do stuff. And at that time, we're going to be juicing it like crazy. So this is more of a dock situation. So it really becomes like this. Well, what are we doing, right? And Xbox, 60 FPS is like a standard that they try to hit. Going to 120 FPS is going to be difficult on a handheld, but we have to curtail that with resolutions and stuff. But going along those same lines, if you were to design a handheld chip, at the time when I made my video 2 years ago, I went through the whole thing of like, it was technically possible. Like, there is no doubt in my mind that we could have arrived at a Series S in a handheld form with just really lowering resolutions. We would had to have had to arrange a slightly larger GPU than the Series S has, but running at lower frequency, and give it more bandwidth than the Series S could use. But this way, we can dial it down on the clock so that it just becomes this like juggling thing, right? Like, what do you do? And with Strix Halo, so what's great about that is everything I said in that Xbox handheld video proved correct, 100% correct with Strix Halo. And I've been able to demonstrate that in my video by showing when we force Strix Halo down to 10 watt, you can take a look at memory bandwidth and it lowers the clock down automatically, and that saves power. So literally everything I said in that video happened in reality. And that's the type of stuff that I'm talking about. And even how AMD does it, AMD doesn't even do it in a smart fashion. They do it in this pretty kind of automatic averaged way. So if you're like running at really low clocks, really low TDP, it starts oscillating the memory clocks between 400 megahertz and 800 megahertz. And what it's doing, it's if you were to think about averaging or interpolating that value to arrive at a bandwidth number. And that is a kind of a waste of power. It's still a large saving of power. But you can imagine if you were like to rev up an engine and then slow off an engine and rev up an engine and slow up an engine, that you would just be wasting gas every time you kind of like just drilled on the engine, right?
Yeah,
So
I get
instead
you.
of pushing all the way down on the throttle and then giving up and then pushing down on the throttle again, how about you just push a little bit? Like, how about you just push at 500 megahertz on this and AMD doesn't do that. So that's the type of things that I'm talking about that Microsoft can do, is that they can define. They say, okay, what are our hardware requirements for Series S? Let us make that definition. Now, the CPU end of like a Series S at 3.5 gigahertz is actually on Zen 2 isn't that hard to hit on Zen 5 now. And especially when we get into like, a potential Xbox with a, Zen 7 CPU, or maybe even better, if it is actually out to 2027, we could be able to recreate the performance ceiling of just the CPU end on the Series S, with 10 times less power. So somewhere around like 3 to 5 watts instead of needing 30 watts like the Series S does now, just for the CPU end. And then on the GPU end, so like it all becomes this like balancing act. Like, how far can we take these things down? And what I would love Microsoft to do is to basically define what a Series S is and make that happen in a profile on a handheld where you say, okay, we're going to hit Series S here. And what we're going to do is we're going to really look at all these clocks and really dial in everything. And that is something that if you take fine tooth comb on, you can actually do to the same degree that they have that split memory design. And then what you're going to wind up finding is not only do you have a handheld chip that was made for handhelds specifically for gaming, but now you had engineers look at it and then tune it up so that this thing is running as well as it should. And those are the things that I have just been asking for all the time. What I have been doing on my channel is basically taking these laptop parts and like cutting down the CPUs, trying to boost the GPU, finding what the correct clock frequency is for the GPU before it stops making sense given our memory bandwidth. And that's the type of stuff that I've been doing. I've been trying to do the engineering tuning part given the parts that I have. And Microsoft has the opportunity to make an engine perfect for handhelds and docking and then tune it up as well. And I think that is that is a winning strategy.
Would they
But yeah,
would they need to commission AMD to make chips to that spec? Or are you saying that they make their own chip from the ground up?
So I would imagine that they would continue to use AMD. And we can entertain like so a lot of people always bring this up. They're like, oh well, what about ARM? ARM CPUs are very good. They are very good, but when you get to like certain performance standpoints, when you really start needing to compare to x86, things are going to start falling to pieces on ARM unless you start pushing more power into it. And then the only real benefit, like, so the main benefit from ARM is power gating the chip. So standby and stuff. That's not to say that x86 can't do this. It's just modern standby as it is right now is garbage. And that really needs to be fixed. So that is like a hardware requirement. They're like, okay, let's figure out hardware gating, which can be done on x86. The biggest part is ARM kind of does that kind of really well already.
Mm.
Um, I but the thing is, AMD has an ARM license as well, so I don't feel like there is a necessity to like have like Xbox silicon, like Microsoft going in and designing their own stuff. They could, but why would you when you've already had a good relationship with AMD and with UDNA, the not even this generation, but the next generation of GPUs that's going to come out. You could just get that and then get any CPU component and you just use their parts and you Lego them together in such a way that you make exactly what you need out of it and then just license that from them like they've already been doing. And then you go
Mhm.
to once you have that design, it's technically, PlayStation or Microsoft's design, then they go out to fabs and they make a deal with a fab and do it. The downside to that is that the latest fabs are very, very expensive, like very, very expensive. So, and not to mention, as with like right now with the tariffs that are going on, things are strange to say the least. But yeah, so I see them going that way and having a fine time that way. I don't really see them needing to do Xbox Silicon specifically. That would be super awesome if they did, but then that's a lot of components there. Like Apple Silicon did it right. They left Image Tech for their GPU and they said they were going to make their own GPU, which had a lot of Image Tech like things.
Mhm.
Um, but Apple Silicon's fantastic. And again, to the same point, look at what Apple has done with the M1, right? The M1 chip, when the M1 first came out, Apple Silicon, that is one of the best mobile SoCs that at the time it was untouchable. In 2020, that chip was untouchable. And the reason it was untouchable is because all of the engineers went full bananas and no one from the business unit of Apple stopped them. And what I mean by that is when Apple made the M1, they made something so good that no one really bought the M2. And even when the M3, like
Yeah.
that's a problem, right? That's a business problem. That's why we don't get good stuff. Because if you make something too good when competition isn't there making you make something good, why would you cannibalize
Upgrade.
your own self when you can just slow
Mhm.
down. You can just slow down and give them little upgrades. Give them a little upgrade so that they have something to upgrade to next year. If you do something too good, have an M1 situation. And then what Apple did to like try to fix their own mistake was they started making MacBooks with 8 gigs of RAM on them and said, no, 8 gigs is enough. And it
I
wasn't.
remember that.
Uh, yeah, so then like they purposefully sandbagged it so that people had to upgrade to like 16 gigs or more later on because they realized it wasn't enough. But
Yeah.
that's what happens when the engineers are allowed to do whatever they want to do without a business unit coming in. The benefit from a gaming console is that gaming consoles are isolated from all of these areas, right? If it was an Xbox handheld, it doesn't, I mean, we can get into the topic of running on Windows and stuff, but ostensibly, AMD looks at it as well, this isn't going to encroach on anything that we sell because this is just their thing that runs their stuff. If we make something too good and it runs Windows and plays game on it, we're kind of screwing ourselves over here because now we just sold something that's way better than anything that we're going to make through our own reasons. So
Yeah. I mean, that kind of brings me to my next question, which is like, what do you think of Microsoft's apparent strategy with Project Kennen to license the Xbox brand to OEMs making PC gaming handhelds, because that's what it seems like Asus is doing with the next ROG Ally. I call it ROG Ally sometimes, which makes no
One?
sense 'cause it looks like it says like Rog, like
Roger.
Roger, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
But it's like in that universe where Microsoft, and Valve's doing it too with the Lenovo Legion Go S. Um,
Mhm.
licensing out and their brands and stuff to build devices um, that could potentially compete with their own down the line. What do you think of that whole strategy?
Oh, maybe it's trying to make lemonade out of lemons of where they find themselves. It's a tough place to be sure because they, I don't even know. Oof, that is a tough place. So the Xbox One in 2013, right? The Xbone, that really hampered them a lot. There was a lot of things that they did wrong at the time. And, when you have the TV thing, the messaging, the original licensing for discs would become digital. All of that was just a bad train wreck. And then they wound up making a system that was $100 more and less performant than the PS4.
Hmm.
So it was just this perfect storm of doing everything wrong. Effectively, Microsoft made they just did it was the worst time to do that. And then they did course correct with the Xbox Series S and X. They are actually very good systems for their price. But it feels like with how everything was, where we were also in that transition of the next generation of kids growing up on mobile, that these platforms sprung up at those same times with Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft. You have all of those, and it was almost as a one-two punch where everyone kind of left. I say everyone left. People gravitated towards Nintendo or Sony, and or they went to
iPad.
these other platforms. Yeah, they went to these other platforms. So basically, Microsoft found themselves in a place that they really didn't have a space in. And so the problem that we have with like the Project Canon thing is twofold. Number one, at first, is that there is no PC hardware outside of Strix Halo, which will not be in these things, um, that is compelling. Like when you compare it to a Steam Deck, it is not going to be two times better than a Steam Deck. And even for the price, like it becomes this real tough balancing act of. Let me ask you this question: what do you think Project Canon should be? What was the price that should launch at?
I mean, I would kind of hope it was at least comparable to the ROG Ally. So what's that? $699, I think.
Okay, so $600, $700, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
All right, so if we're inside of that territory, right, of what that is, there is nothing hardware wise that is different from the Ally or LIX, the Z1E version of those.
Mm.
So performance wise, they're effectively the same thing. So people that already own those have no real reason to go to this Xbox One.
Is it too early
And
for the Z2 then, you think? I don't know.
so so the Z2E is not out yet, and for reasons I'm not sure why it wouldn't be out. The Z2E, so there's like the Z2 Go, the Z2, and then the Z2E. The Z2 Go is what's already in the Steam Deck, the Lenovo Legion Go, and that's not good at all.
No.
So it's worse than an Ally Z1E and Ally X Z1E. So no one cares about it because it's also $730. So that's $730 and worse than a Z1E. Now the Z2 is this kind of hybrid of different types of Strix Point chips. And even that is probably going to be very similar to a Z1E. And then you have the Z2E, which is effectively this Strix Point HX370. The Strix Point HX370 only just recently, and I covered this in a video, AMD literally just crossed the finish line with this. They were having problems with their heterogeneous CPU cores. So there's performance cores and efficiency cores. And that was having a real tough time on Windows. It actually worked just fine on Linux. So on Windows, that just got fixed literally like a few weeks ago, and I did a video on that showing you need the latest GISA, the latest chipset drivers, and the latest video card drivers. And with that, we got like 30 to 40% better performance on Cyberpunk. There were some regressions in some other games, but that shows you like how bad things were on those heterogeneous
Well,
cores that we basically got 30 to 40% more performance.
yeah. So Z2E essentially got delayed in a way, would you say? Is
I
that the
think it
read you
did.
get? Because
So it,
I say
yeah, go
this
ahead.
because if it did get delayed, that kind of tracks with what I heard about Project Cannon, which that it was meant to launch in May, but has been delayed to later this year. So
Hmm.
could that be in line with Z2E and then waiting for that one, or is it just still they'd have to start creating stock? And is it too late already for that, or is that pure copium and opium on my end?
So here's the part that I can't make any sense of because the numbers don't make any sense to me.
Right?
HX370 Strix Point. We already have handhelds that have those. I have those handhelds, and I've had them for a while now. The problem is that those handhelds cost $1,300 for like the minimum type of spec with HX370.
Is that the Ion
So
Neo?
no, I do not have the INEO. I have the GP2Win devices. The GP2Win Mini 2025 has the HX370 in it. But the INEO 3 also has the HX370 in it, and it's also expensive. So it's not these companies are not charging 1,300 because they just want to.
Mm.
They're charging that much on the HX370 because that's how much it costs them to get it. It's expensive for them to get it. So how is the Z2E going to be inexpensive when the Z2 Go for the Lenovo Legion Go is already $730, right? For the Windows version. It's 550 now for the Steam version.
Crikey.
And the Z2, yeah. So how much is the Z2E going to cost? It's not going to cost 600. It's not going to cost 700. It's going to cost 1,000 at best. So where I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening because it's too expensive now. And I don't think Microsoft wants to have $1,000 handheld on Best Buy because I don't think that they think people would buy that.
I
So
think yeah, it's not a good look for Xbox to attach their brand to a piece of hardware that's vastly more expensive than the Series X. Like the whole point of Xbox as a brand, I think, and consoles in general is some degree of affordability, I would have thought. Because, you know, typically it's subsidized by the software, right? So
exactly right.
I would have I don't know. I always thought like if they are doing this partner device with Asus that Asus, I don't know how it's pronounced, but I'm just gonna say Asus. Um I had this hope, this vague hope that they would subsidize it in some way to get those costs down, but it's probably wishful thinking in reality. But
Yeah,
at
I
the
don't
same
know.
time, I can't imagine them wanting $1,000 device like you.
Yeah, so I don't I mean basically it comes down to, well, what about the Z1E? The Z1E is still good and that's better than the Z2 Go and it's also the same as the Z2 and the costs aren't crazy.
Mm,
So anyway, so that's one problem, right? From like I talked about at length, there's two problems. The first problem is hardware doesn't really make any sense of where things are right now with their cost and everything that's involved. They can still go to Z1E, but that's not exciting for most people that are there because they already have the Ally or the Ally X with Z1E, which
mm,
means that the second problem is not really a problem, but they if this is coming out later this year, that means Microsoft is going to have so fundamentally redesigned how gaming handhelds work on Windows that it is going to transform everyone's opinion on it. And that is a tall order itself as well. So if you can't convince people that are your hardcore people about the performance side of it, what can you convince them on? It has to be that if the experience is so good and so seamless on a Windows based device that you're like, oh, okay, I could see that. That makes sense. But tall order. Can Xbox, like, not for nothing, and I don't mean to like, poo poo this thing or anything, but like some of the news that we've like come out, like, oh, the Xbox app had an update. It has a compact mode now. And it's like you just move the slider over and out. Like
mm.
that's I don't that's not exciting and that's not doing anything. So, what are they going to bring to the table? Because now knowing that more than likely the hardware is not going to be anything impressive or for its price, that means that this software component needs to be so good that I mean, for how quickly, maybe they've been working on this for over a year now in the background, right? Perhaps that's the case. I have no idea.
That have been.
But yeah, so if that's the case, I mean, for what I know and what I see people using is that they don't want to see a Windows Start button. They don't want to see Windows Desktop. They want to power on this device and jump into
Straight into that game.
Windows. Yes, yeah, it has to
Well,
go into the Xbox front end.
yeah. I mean, there was some news today. I don't know if you saw it, but we posted on Windows Central. We've got the first hints of a full screen switch that you can boot straight into from the login screen. A new setting in Windows that has gaming underscore something or other in the registry key. So it's kind of like I haven't read the article myself yet, but somebody noticed this on the Windows Insider program on the Canary super duper cutting edge ring, right? And
Mhm.
they found these new strings which refer to this sort of full screen experience. And another thing I know is that the whole Canon range of devices is on a separate branch on Windows internally, which is currently being dog fooded at Redmond, and they're all testing it, and they've all got these devices already. And it's a whole new version of Windows from
Okay,
what sounds like. So this could be like as part of the delay. If the delay isn't necessarily for chips, then the delay
I don't think
could
it is.
be for that software experience, like you mentioned.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
instead of them hitting the spring launch window, they're now
right.
pushing that out to the autumn update or something like that. Um, because I did hear it's quite buggy at the moment, which you would expect it to be, right? Um,
Naturally.
so I suppose there is that. Like for you, if this device, what would it take realistically for this device to make any form of sense to you? Because you did mention earlier that there's with the Steam Deck, there's a retail presence aspect, which is a hindrance to the Steam Deck's prevalence, I suppose, in the market. Xbox is a globally recognized brand, and Microsoft has, established retail relationships with a lot of companies and suppliers and outlets. Does that help make this device make more sense to you? Like, what other things would beyond the shell? Is there anything else that the device would have to do to make it make sense to you? Because I don't think this is the last partner device we're going to see out of Microsoft and Xbox.
Right. So there's two things that I want to comment on there. And the first one I'll just talk about what I want out of it. Honestly, the thing that I want out of it, and if it's a possibility at all, if it is a separate branch of Windows, I'm totally cool with that. If that means that it's closer in line with the Xbox is, if I could get, my Xbox 360 games that I already purchased running on this handheld, then yes, yes, please. That sounds awesome.
I
It
don't
what
I
about
I don't think it's going to be that, unfortunately.
right? And that's what I
But yeah,
think is like when we talk about an Xbox handheld, I think that's what the expectations are, and they're not so much PC gaming handheld, but they're an Xbox handheld,
mm,
and I think that's what we really want. And failing that, if it's just something that if it doesn't have that, honestly, if they could realistically like hammer in sleep mode functions and get that baked in really tight and nice, great. If it's just having a dashboard that is, if you just boot it up and it goes straight into the Xbox the UI, and you have all of these other extensions, like I don't know if you've used the Xbox PC app lately.
yes,
Um,
I've actually got it
yeah,
up right
so
now.
yeah, so like I played Adamfall. I just finished Adamfall, and I built like there's a PC that I have for I use as my console now. Um, but I had to like do a bunch of stuff so that I could use a controller exclusively. So like I start my machine with the an Xbox, so I hold down the Xbox button and it turns on, and my TV switches to that input, and
Oh,
I
that's
then
cool.
yes, yeah. So and then I use a controller, and when there's no game on there, it is a mouse. It emulates a mouse, and as soon as the game starts, it goes back to just being a control. So it's
How
like
did you do
all of
that?
these things. I made a video about it. I made a video about it. I said, was I did everything Microsoft can't do or something.
Oh,
um,
I'm gonna check that out. Post that on Windows Central. That sounds awesome. But continue. Sorry.
yeah. So so that's what I've been doing. And when I was installing Atomfall, it was like, hey, do you want, I looked at the Blizzard arcade, right, with Lost Vikings, Rock and Roll Racing. I was like, oh, sweet. I clicked on it. It said you need BattleNet. I was like, oh, I don't really want to install BattleNet on this because I was just doing Steam and Xbox app, and I was like, yeah, whatever. Let me go ahead and install that. So I installed the BattleNet app, and then the Xbox PC app was like, hey, do you want to enable the extension? So that whenever Xbox app launches, we automatically log into BattleNet with your account. And I just clicked a little check mark, and then it just signed me into BattleNet. I didn't have to do anything, and I was like, okay, that's cool. And if that, when we saw the leaked picture of Steam as a tab thing, right?
Mm,
If that's what Microsoft is getting to, where it's like check this box and everything that, as long as you've signed in once, we know that that information is, and we have made all the connections necessary. That after the initial sign in, just check this box and bloop, there you go. All of your stuff is there, and we're going to display it in a nice way. That's cool and that's awesome. That there is value to that as a front end, but that is just a front end, right? So that is just one part of the component of it. At the end of the day, if you still anticipate using this as a Windows type of device, the controller itself needs to be no longer a second class citizen. And I go over that in the video I just talked about, where I make a controller a first class citizen. Like when I boot up and I see my screen, it says, enter your PIN. And I do that through my controller. I enter my PIN through my controller. I when I've had my system update. You ever go with like Windows Update and it's like, hey, do you want to use OneDrive? And you have that splash screen before you even start it up. I can even control that part on my controller, like without like just restarted my system, and
mm,
I don't have a keyboard or anything. I just power on my Xbox controller and I just navigate with the analog stick because it emulates a mouse. And all of that just works, and I show off how to do it and how to set all that up. Um,
that's awesome.
yeah,
I'll link that in
so
description so people can check it out.
like
Right.
I don't want to have to be me the one that has to do that. I want Microsoft to
Yeah.
do that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like Microsoft, why has every form of input been a first class citizen? Like you've had tablet, a pen input, touch input, a keyboard, mouse, everything except a controller.
Yeah.
And why is a game controller not so like what's crazy is since Android 2.3, right? Version 2.3 of Android has had it so that if it connects to using an X input, Xbox's own input, if it sees X input, you can control Android with a X input controller. And that was Android almost 10 years ago.
Yeah,
So
it is crazy.
yeah, so why is that? And that like so that's like what I want as like a okay, if we're just going to talk about Windows and nothing like fancy like actually having 360 emulation, play my Xbox One games. If I'm just PC, the controller itself needs to be a first class citizen.
Mm. I think like one of the issues there, like with regards to whether or not someone should even buy this over a Legion Go or one of the Z1 Extreme devices, is I think a lot of these features are obviously going to be backported because they're just going to be part of a Windows 11 update. And I think there'll
Yeah,
just be a toggle in the settings, like boot this device in game mode or something like that, and you'll slap that on, and then you get the full screen experience on like this is how I imagine it being. I haven't actually seen it myself, but and I suppose in that universe, like the main reason to buy this device would be just if you're an Xbox guy and you like the Xbox brand. I mean, I would get one. Even though I got my Lenovo Legion going. I quite like it. I miss VRR a lot though.
right.
Um, but I I like the bigger screen because my eyesight's not that
Sure.
great.
Yeah,
Um,
I get it.
Variety's the spice of life and all that. I suppose like we've gone up to an hour here, so I just want to get in some closing topics with you. And I suppose the first thing I want to ask is, what are your favorite PC gaming handhelds that you've got right now? What is your preferred device that you mainly use? Because I presume you've got a lot available.
Yeah, so my favorite one that I really love is the new GPD-Win Mini, the 2025 edition, with Strix Point. And the performance you get, it's very expensive though. But the GPD-Win Mini 2025, even the 2024 and the 2023 version, they use the Asus ROG Ally screen, so it's the same
Ah,
exact 7-inch 120 hertz VRR screen. So you get that same screen, but something that is clamshell. So it can fit in your pocket. Not that you would, it would be gigantic, but it is much, much smaller than any other device that's out there. So in terms of just portability, I absolutely love it. And then my honestly, I still really like the Ally X, the 80 watt hour battery, and everything else that Asus has done with the Ally X. I really, really like. Getting that to 650 grams at with an 80 watt hour battery is an engineering feat, and they did a great job. So those are my two favorite devices at the moment.
yeah, I'm just looking at the GPD Win Mini right now. It looks really, really cool. It's got like the attachable grips on there. That's quite clever. There's one of the issues I had with the GPD Win, the original one, is that the clamshell's not it's not the nicest device to hold in the hand, but
Right?
yeah, it is. Looking at this, it's the high end model is $1,300 almost,
Yeah,
and
very expensive.
yeah, it's not a cheap boy. There's a lower end
No,
model that's $769. That's the
right?
8840U
Yeah.
model, which I think is a bit more reasonable. But
It it
yeah,
it's also good.
yeah, it's really cool. There's so much variety, and I think that's like one of the attractive points about Windows and PC gaming in general, is that there is so much variety out there that you know
Yeah.
console gamers often don't get to enjoy. But at the same time, a lot of console gamers, they don't want the complexity. They just want the device that plugs in and just works. And sometimes I'm like, I've got a Razer Blade with a 4070 laptop, in it,
Mhm.
and I can play a lot of the my Series X games to, a really good degree. But sometimes it's just like, I'm gonna leave my laptop with, I don't know, WhatsApp and Slack and Discord running, and then just play on my Xbox for the simplicity's sake, right? It's a little bit lazier for me sometimes. And it's with that in mind, the console experience, that I feel like it would be remiss if we didn't at least mention the Nintendo Switch 2, which is going to be revealed in full tomorrow as of recording
Tomorrow,
the
yeah.
show. Do you have any high thoughts about the Switch 2? Like, I'm not a Nintendo guy. I have previously had a Switch, and it just sort of gathered dust in the drawer. Because I just don't have nostalgia for those kind of games, and oftentimes, like, the games that I would want to play on there, I can just play on my Xbox on my PC anyway. So I ended up not using it very much. Um, and so when it comes to Switch 2, I'm not particularly hyped about it myself, but obviously I know there are tens of millions of people that are probably going to buy this thing. What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
the Switch 2, and do you think, like, you know, people might be surprised at the price or the performance or anything like that? Because I've seen some wild takes out there that, like, oh, the Switch 2 is going to be as powerful as a PS5 base model and all this kind of stuff. So,
Right.
should we bring people down to earth a bit?
Yeah. So there's a few things to talk about there. I'll try to be as fast as I can here because it's a lot to talk about. So for Switch 2, number one, the one of the most important components of there has not been talked about at all, and that's the capacity of the battery. Because that's going to really be eye opening for all of us in terms of what it's actually going to be capable of doing. I talked with a bunch of people in terms of like what types of power this is going to be using, and based on what is already on like demo types. When I say demo, other types of units that have the same type of chipset, is that lowest power wise, you're looking at around 10 watt in terms of everything running, which is fairly high, especially compared to the Switch One. So that's going to dictate how long battery life is.
Mm.
So I'm very, very interested to see that specifically because I feel like that's going to be revealing. The Switch 2 also, so the original Switch also, not many people I think know this, is that, NVIDIA tried for the longest time to get into the mobile space. When they were just GPUs only, when you take a look at their stock price, it wasn't really all that high. No one in Wall Street cared. Same for AMD, like no one really cared. And not until like 10 years ago did anyone really care. But at the time, NVIDIA bought a software defined radio company so that they were trying to make a whole mobile chipset suite that they could sell and then do phones. Problem is that no one bought it. No one wanted. They were stuck with
Mm.
Qualcomm, and they said, So what was wind up happening was as they were doing this, they were making the chips and no one to sell it to. So what does Nvidia do? They make the Nvidia Shield. So the Nvidia Shield comes out. I don't know if you remember that
Yeah, I
device
remember
or the
that,
set.
yeah. Handheld
So that
NVIDIA
Yeah,
thingy-majig.
exactly. So that was literally Nvidia making lemonade out of the lemons that they had.
Mm.
2017, the Tegra X1 is out, and I don't know if you know this or not, but it all came into me like the scene from Ratatouille where the food critic bites into the thing and he like zooms back in time to when he was a kid. It was PAX East, I believe, and Nvidia was there, and they were showing off a tablet without you could switch. It would like you play on and as an Android tablet, and then you would plug it in and dock it, and it would go to your screen, and that's what wound up
Yes.
being the Switch. Um,
Hmm.
so wha- Nvidia was already had this thing, right? They didn't know what they to do with it. No one was buying it, so they go to Nintendo, and Nintendo says yes. Now, at the time, and Nvidia's in the worst position here, right? They don't have any position of power. So and Nintendo gets these things for a great price, right? Because Nvidia wants to create this partnership. But you look at whatever Nvidia has done, they have never been a good business uh, they've never been a good um person to deal with, either like B2C or B2B, right? Like every situation that they look at, you look at how aggressive, like I want to say nothing aggressive, but like not even malicious, but like they are very protective of anyone taking advantage of them, and they take advantage of everyone else first. So you look at Microsoft on the original Xbox that had a GeForce 3 in it. They rapidly go to the Xbox 360 and go to ATI because the deal that they had with Nvidia soured, and Nvidia was like, "No, you're still going to pay top dollar." So they rushed out and made an Xbox 360. Come along for the PS3, 11th hour, the cell chip isn't as good as anyone thought it would be, and they have to slap in an Nvidia GPU on there. Nvidia takes them for a ride. PlayStation no longer, Sony's no longer working with them. Tesla had Tegra chips in them for a hot second, no longer customers of theirs. So Nvidia is hostile towards all of these companies. So now they find themselves in that Switch has sold 150 million units, and now Nintendo wants to make a part two. So they need more Nvidia stuff. But now Nvidia is in a position of power, and that is why I think the price number one has increased because Nvidia wants their money out of this and Nintendo wants their money out of it. Like Nintendo stopped selling hardware at a loss or even break even. They wanted to make money on hardware. So then you have two companies that want to make money on their hardware, and this is going to increase the cost of it. And the 450 price I think was a good price without like a game pack in. I think the Mario Kart 9 bundle for 500 is there. I think the thing that was unfortunate is that right now all those tariffs are in place, so we don't even know where that is going to take pricing. So that's a big old question mark of how they're going to do stuff, or if they're just going to eat that. It remains to be seen. I do think it's going to be 450 ish, somewhere around there, like 450 without any game and 500 for the Mario Kart 9 bundle. I think that is probably correct. Um, 400 would be ideal, but I think people are okay with that, especially because like the PS5 Pro is $700. So I think the PS5 Pro being a pioneer in just these super expensive things, kind of came in hot, but also cooled off all of these expectations on pricing, and everyone just thinks everything's more expensive now anyway. So I think that it will come in at that price. The unfortunate for Microsoft is that the Switch 2 is going to be a very good handheld. And
Mm.
what Microsoft finds themselves in a very 2013 situation all over again, where they lost the console space to PS4, and then that people built a digital ecosystem on PS4, or they left a Fortnite, Roblox or whatever, and they were found themselves left behind. And there was a not insignificant amount of people that were only buying Switch One games for the exclusives, and not buying the multi-platform games on there because, like, Hogwarts Legacy, Mortal Kombat One, they just look terrible, right? They just, you can clearly see that it should never have been put on that machine. But with the Switch 2, we're now going to get to a situation where it looks as good as consoles. So now Switch 2 is coming out in June. Microsoft does not have anything to say anything to anybody about anything. So once again, Nintendo's going to like waltz in here, have zero competition, no one kind of fighting them. And meanwhile, while Microsoft is building something in the background, is going to be losing ground once again while people build up their portable, their handheld digital ecosystem. So I don't know. I mean, like, the PC space is like almost a dark horse in this thing, because where does the Steam Deck 2 come into there? So it remains to be seen how this all like unwinds, but it is,
Oh,
time is of the essence.
I think this is what, in a way, you're kind of describing why Microsoft felt like it had no choice but to buy Activision Blizzard, because they probably knew
Mm.
this was coming. And it's like, well, if we're gonna be in a situation where there is a direct competitor, another direct competitor, console wise, to our current gen systems, then in order to keep the business going, we need to be on that console, to the tune of billions of dollars with your Minecraft and your Call of Duty and things like that. Um, at least eventually, I think. I don't think we'll see a lot of those games at launch, but I think we'll probably see them later on. Of course, we will. I mean, Microsoft pledged to regulators that they're going to put Call of Duty on the Switch, so it's something like they have to do. And part of me wonders
Right.
if, like, in that universe where they're spreading their tendrils across all these kind of different devices and potentially even giving desktop PC gamers a way to gamerize their Windows experience, which would put PC Game Pass front and center, with a Steam tab, sure, but then there'd also be like, yeah, we've got a Steam tab, but here's PC Game Pass and here's our game sales over here. You can use Steam, sure, but like maybe this deal's really good and start enticing people that way, right? Um,
Mm.
I suppose, like, it is going to be interesting to see the way the industry evolves over the next decade. Microsoft obviously going further and further in the software direction. I do think Microsoft still has value to offer in the hardware space. Like you say, they've got a very good engineering team at Microsoft. They've done a lot of innovative things with the Surface line. Quality issues notwithstanding, there's some innovation that's been really great across the board, even if like the execution, the marketing, retail strategy hasn't always been the best. But um, I'm intrigued to see where it all goes anyway. And um, but yeah, I think we're going to wrap up the show there. Do you have any closing thoughts on all of this? Anything you want to share with the people, and also let people know where they can find you on the internet? And all these links will be in the description too for those who want to check out.
Yeah, the main place that I post is going to be on YouTube. So that's where you find all my videos. I do need to go to. I still only mainly post on Twitter still. I have to get find a way to cross post easily because I can't be posting the same thing on multiple things. So I have to do that. So for social media stuff, it's still Twitter, and that's just my name. So it's CARY GOLOMB. And then on YouTube, where I post all my videos and where I go into a really deep sense on what this hardware is capable of, and taking the most of it. You can find me there, and the Phawx on YouTube.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I've been Jez, Windows Central on Xbox 2 podcast. If you listen to this on Patreon, thanks so much for coming. And if you listen to it later on my YouTube channel, thanks as well. Drop a like if you enjoyed it. Definitely check out Carrie's content in the description. And whether you're listening to this before or after, happy Nintendo Switch 2 announcement day. I hope everything goes well. Um, But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where all this handheld stuff goes, and maybe we can catch up again when Microsoft shows its hand in the coming weeks or months ahead.
Yeah, I would love to.
All right, cool beans, and that's
Thanks so
us
much.
out.